Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Spider-Verse Retrospectives, and it's my birthday everyone, and what better way to celebrate it than by continuing our discussion on the third Edge of Spider-Verse miniseries as we take a look at Edge of Spider-Verse Volume 3, Number 2. So, what Spideys will we be meeting today? Well, first things first, let's check in on the Spinstress. Yeah, you remember her. The Disney princess version of Spider-Man, the one who made a deal with her fairy godmother to get spider power so she could go to a ball and fight her evil mother, who was the queen, who had stolen a mystical orb and became that world's Mysterio. Plus, she had a bishop at her side that was this world's Doc Ock. My point is, she's had a bit of a history, and immediately after that event, we know she got pulled in to help with the end of Spider-Verse. But now, end of the Spider-Verse is over. She can go home now, and she's more than happy to be there. And she immediately comes home and arrives back on her Earth in the marketplace, singing about how she's happy to be home, how everything is all the same as she remembers it. Well, sort of. There are some differences. Like, for example, the people in the marketplace seem to run from her and even cower from her. And when she looks around, there's a wanted poster for Spinstress. Yeah, Spinstress isn't seen as a hero right now. In fact, from the point of view of the kingdom, they see her as an assassin who tried to kill the queen. Personally, I think that they should realize that the queen was fucking nuts, but whatever. They probably don't get the whole story. My point is, the Spinstress is now a wanted woman, and Princess Petra is kind of blissfully ignorant to this fact. And even at one point, as she's singing about how happy she is to be home, she runs into Mary James Watson, who tries to kind of bring her down to reality and show her that she's a wanted woman, that people are afraid of her and all that stuff. But again, she's just more happy to be home and just enjoy all these luxuries. And even in the course of her singing, she wants to go check in on her mom and see how she's doing. Mary James tries to once again kind of bring her down, but she isn't listening as she and her pet Spider Webster swing away to the castle. As such, then once they arrive, she changes out of her Spidey jammies and goes to meet with her mother, only to find her mother asleep in a glass case, which Princess Petra is shocked by. And even more surprising, she sees Bishop Octopus, who has not been hauled away, but I don't understand. People, I feel like should be more afraid of this asshole, considering he did a lot of considering that he was kind of violent in the last time we saw him. But point is, in the absence of the queen and with Princess Petra gone, he took the throne because yeah, it turns out that after Princess Petra smashed the orb that the queen was using for her mystical powers, apparently it had an after effect on the queen, and the end result, she wound up, or gave the queen her mystical powers. Basically, when she smashed the orb, her mother wound up going into a deep sleep that none could heal her from. As such, because the sleep was caused by the orb being smashed, it's believed that the magical orb could restore her. But again, it's in pieces. They can't fix anything, with the container having the pieces being conveniently on standby. As such, Bishop Octopus claims that the only one that could potentially fix the orb would be that of a goblin. And well, that's when Princess Petra has a thought. What if she called her fairy godmother Norma? As such, once Bishop Octopus leaves, telling Princess Petra that he's happy that she's back, which has a hint of venom in it, but whatever. Basically, she once again sings about how sorry she is about this whole thing, that she wishes she could fix it, and she immediately tries calling out for her fairy godmother to try and fix all this, when someone crashes right through the window and wants to know where the hell Spinstress is. And this person is this world's version of Kraven the Hunter, or as he's called here, Kraven the Huntsman. And, yeah, the instant Princess Petra sees him, she stops singing and goes on the offensive as she grabs a chair with the intent on smacking Kraven with it. He ends up pulling it out of her arm by a whip and tells her that chairs are for sitting, not for use as weapons. But either way, once he goes on about how he wants to fight Spinstress, immediately Princess Petra gets into a fighting stance, says, well, then bring it on, and he laughs in her face because, well, he believes that the Spinstress is monstrous because something I didn't mention about the wanted posters, they don't really capture Spinstress's essence as in the pro posters. She looks more monstrous, and Webster looks like a genuine monster spider, whereas Princess Petra is a dainty little princess with a little pet spider that couldn't harm a fly. Which what I love is that when he insults Webster, Webster just shakes one of his legs as if it's a fist. Kind of reminds me of that one episode of The Simpsons Trails of Horror when Bart messed with that spider when he was a fly. My point is, Point is, immediately Craven is not interested in Princess Petra, as he just thinks that she's nobody, or at the very least nobody to him. However, as he's asking about Spinstress, Mary James bursts on the scene because, well, he saw Craven jump through the window, and so he wants to know if something is going on. As such, when he comes in, he asks, "Hey, is Spinstress okay?" And then when Princess Petra introduces Mary James to Craven, Craven mainly realizes, hey, you know Spinstress? Okay, you're useful. As such, he ends up grabbing Mary James and jumps right out the window, telling Princess Petra that if the Spinstress wants to see her, well, boy toy again, I'm just going to use that name because I don't really know what else to say. If she wants to see him again, that he needs to meet her in the Goblin Forest around midnight. As such, it turns out that the Craven had a ride, as outside the window was a giant vulture named Adrian. Yes, this giant vulture is meant to be this world's version of the Vulture, so, cool, I guess. But either way, Craven flies off to the Goblin Woods, and it's at that point when Bishop Octopus and the rest of the guards come in because, well, they saw an intruder come in, so they were worried about what was going on. And as such, once Princess Petra explains what happened, well, immediately there's an even bigger sense of urgency because when Baron Octopus, or Bishop Octopus, looks around, he sees that the shards for the orb have been missing, and so they assume that Craven stole them. As such, immediately freaking out, Princess Petra runs off and changes back into her spinstress dress as she decides that she needs to go to the Goblin Wood to confront Craven. However, it turns out that Webster's got a little surprise for her because it turns out it wasn't Craven that took the orb pieces. It was Webster. He just snatched them when no one was looking. As such, Spinster thinks that this is great. They can pretty much just kill two birds with one stone. Go out to the woods and save Mary James and maybe even find Norma, since hey, she's the fairy godmother, so hey, maybe she's in the Goblin Woods. As such, midnight comes around and Spinster goes to the Goblin Woods to meet with Craven, and with him he's kind of in a tree and he's in a tree hideout in the woods. And basically after we get a kind of amusing song sequence where Mary James asks why Craven does what he does, and literally it's just that the huntsman hunts because that's his nature. Well, the spinstress comes in and ends up just knocking him aside, webbing him to the wall so he can't do anything before wanting to go and save Mary James. Though it does lead to a funny scene where Craven doesn't think that the spinstress is the spinstress because she doesn't look anything like her wanted posters. It's again kind of hilarious. But ultimately, things kind of get put on hold, as in a puff of smoke, Norma, the fairy godmother, appears, and immediately Spinstress is just happy to see her, telling her about how she wanted to see her again, how she called for her but she didn't come, and she needs her help. But the fairy godmother just kind of scoffs at her and says, "Why should I help someone who didn't help me?" Because after all, part of the arranged deal was that, well, Spinstress would deliver the orb back to Norma. And, well, she never delivered. As such, Princess Petra starts apologizing because, well, she did want to bring back the orb, but it got smashed in the fight. But she did bring back the orb pieces, and she's asking Norma if she can repair them since she thinks that, again, that orb should be able to restore her mother to life. As such, Norma happily takes the pieces and then restores them into an orb. Only the magic ain't exactly very nice looking, because we see a weird blackness and smoke coming from the orb, and when it's finally reassembled, we see that within the orb now is that same blackness manifesting the face of what looks like a monster. Yeah, it turns out Norma's kind of an evil person. Gee, who'd have thunk it? And basically, once Norma has what she wants, she makes the webbing that was holding Craven in place disappear and orders him to kill Spinstress. As such, Spinstress wants to know what the hell's going on, and so as she's duking it out with Craven, Norma finally explains what her whole deal was. It turns out the orb, yes, was stolen from her, but she let it get stolen. The thing is, in order for the orb to work, it needed a touch of hatred, vengeance, so to speak, which is what the queen had in spades. I mean, while the orb did push her a little bit in the wrong direction, the thing is, ultimately, the queen still had thoughts of vengeance towards the other kingdoms, and ultimately, that bit of vengeance is all the orb needed to activate its innate powers. And as a result, Norma essentially just used the queen for her own ends. Of course, that makes Princess Petra puzzled, because then why didn't she just steal the orb back? After all, if it infected the queen, why couldn't she have just gone back into the castle and stolen it? Well, it turns out that that's where Princess Petra came in, because you see, there was a little enchantment on the castle of the queen that Norma could not enter it unless someone made a wish. And after all, Petra made a wish. She wished that she could be like Webster. She wished she could go to the ball. And Norma delivered. So, yeah. Essentially, Norma played Petra for a fool, giving her the spider powers, but essentially just using her as a means to an end to get what she wanted. As such, Petra quickly realizes that she's kind of responsible for all this, but basically Craven uses that as an opportunity to try and knock her out of the giant tree fortress they're in, but the spinstress ends up shooting a web line and pulling him out with her, which almost makes him fall to the ground below outside, which Petra at least is at first horrified by, because that would mean he gets killed. But it's at that point that the vulture came in and saved Cravens, and with a giant vulture on his side, Craven starts kind of turning the tide of battle. However, as Norma was expositing and Spinstress and Craven were fighting, it turns out Webster went over to Mary James and undid his binds, and so as Spinstress is having issue, Mary James comes out and throws one of Craven's maces to Spinstress, who immediately just shoots a web line and uses it to smack both Craven and the vulture aside, essentially winning the battle. As such, Spinstress jumps right back to the fortress and gets ready to confront Norma, which Norma just laughs at her because she can't do anything to her. And as such, Spinstress shoots a couple web lines at her, and again, Norma thinks that she can't do anything because, hey, Norma's the one who gave her spider powers, she can't hurt her. But it turns out that Spinstress wasn't aiming at Norma. She was aiming at the orb. And she immediately just pulls it back and throws it to Mary James. Something that makes Norma freak out because she kind of wants that back. As such, Spinstress says that if Norma wants the orb back, she needs to make her a new deal. Basically, Spinstress will return the orb, but Norma has to revive her mother. And as such, Norma, quickly realizing that the ball is firmly in Spinstress's corner, and concedes, and with a snap of her fingers, restores Princess Petra's mother to life. However, there's a little caveat to this deal. You see, Norma made a deal with Spinstress, not Mary James, who has the orb in his hands, and as such, to make sure that the fairy godmother doesn't get it, he just smashes the orb on the floor, destroying it. As such, this causes a chain reaction which begins affecting the entire tree fortress and causing the whole thing to explode. Thankfully, Spinstress, Webster, and Mary James are able to get out of there, with Spinstress grabbing the good bar before everything went boom, and thus she's able to bring him back to the castle. Though he's not exactly looking in the best of health, as smashing the orb essentially did coat him in this weird black substance that does seem to be making him a little sick. But for the end of the day, he is still thankful that he was able to spend time with the Spinstress. And while she at first tries to go off because she says she has to go meet with the Queen, Mary James just kind of smiles at her and says, go and see your mother, princess. Your secret is safe with me," which I think is sweet. As such, Spinstress goes away, and she begins thinking that, because remember how in last issue, apparently, caveat of her keeping her powers beyond the ball was that she'd never find love? Well, maybe she's starting to think that maybe she's not as cursed as she thinks she is, because Mary James, she's nice, and she even promised us that they would see each other again. So it's looking like things are up, as when Spinstress goes back to the castle and goes back to being Princess Petra, she sees that her mother has indeed awoken, and while her mother is still under the mindset that Spinstress was an assassin, she seems a lot calmer, less burdened, and as such, she actually does embrace her daughter in a hug, and the two of them have a nice song about how they think things are good again. Well, unfortunately, Mary James still didn't come out of the battle with Norma unscathed, as we cut back to him as he's wandering the kingdom, still feeling a little sick, as he thinks that he's not doing the best health, and when he looks at himself, he sees that black substance that came from the orb is starting to grow over him. It begins encompassing him little by little, and he begins freaking out, wondering what the hell is going on, until his form is completely subsumed, and in his place, we see a monstrous black demon with a white spider on its chest. Yep, Mary James has now become Venom, and the story ends as we see the fairy godmother laughing in the background as Venom says that he'll be more than happy to see the princess again. So, yeah, Mary James is kind of screwed. But either way, with that out of the way, let's move on to the next story. And this is a one, and like with last issue with the Spider Killer, that we actually are introduced to a new Spidey in this one. In this case, we're told this tale of the Sky Spider, and this one is very much it's another fantasy setting, but it's a different one from the Spinstresses. Like I said, while the Spinstresses universe kind of was modeled around like Disney princesses and all that stuff, in the case of the Sky Spider, it definitely feels more like I want to say an adventure fantasy kind of deal. As we're introduced to a world that's, I don't want to say low tech, or even like Dark Ages, so to speak. But it is kind of stuck. But it is actually, yeah, low tech is the best way to describe this place. Basically, in this world, modern technology is not as prevalent as it is in our universe, and thus people tend to live in the woods, hold mystical rituals, and they tend to have a lot of superstitions as well. One of which involves a plague that is spreading across the world, as people seem to be transforming into monsters. There are soldiers who are filing their teeth to sharp edges. There are children that are born as freaks and creatures, and well, word of this has actually come back to a little small village called Queen's Redwood, and well, the elders of Queen's Redwood decide that if they want to make sure they can avoid that plague, then they need to leave everyone alone. Basically, they start imposing a thing of isolationism in the village. Put simply, don't let anyone come in and don't talk to anyone from outside. Essentially, just keep to yourselves and don't mess with anybody else, because if we do that, then we'll be safe and all that. And basically, to break this rule is to get yourself exiled from the village. So yeah, very much an isolationist point of view, which I think is stupid, but whatever. But whatever. I'm not in charge of this village. And well, that rule comes back to bite everyone in the ass, as one night an old woman wanders into the village and begins knocking at everyone's doors, asking for food, shelter, water, all that nice jazz. And yeah, much like with Norma in the last story, this old lady is supposed to be this world's Green Goblin, and I only know that because she has a pendant that resembles a Green Goblin, and she's wearing a hood, which I think is purple. Let me go back and check. I want to see if it was actually a purple hood or not, because I think it was. But let me go and look. Yeah, it was. Yeah, the hood was purple. Put simply, this lady goes by the name of Mother, and basically, yeah, sorry, I went over that. But yeah, Mother is turned away by everyone because of the whole rule, and well, she doesn't take kindly to what the village is doing. As such, as a bit of an FU to everybody, she goes to the village well, and then just kind of bites her wrist and drops a little bit of her blood into the village well. And as a result, it actually causes an infection in the well that transforms the water, making it a lot more rasp and dark and poisonous. And eventually, the village does realize what Mother did, and they do end up burying the well and making a new one. But before they did that, a good chunk of the population did drink from the well. And while it didn't look like it had any adverse effects on the people, their children were other stories. Basically, any woman who was pregnant with child at that time who, well, drank the water, they gave birth to children who were monsters. It's implied through dialogue that these monsters were meant to be like variants of some Spidey villains. They mentioned how some had claws, some had scales, and some just were abnormal. And put simply, the village, believing that their children were just abominations, wound up killing them and burying them. That is, except in the case of one Ricker and Mary. Mary was also pregnant, and she also took of the water, but she did not want to give up her child. And as such, one night when her water broke, rather than telling her husband what was going on, she ran out to a barn and gave birth silently. And as a result, she gave birth to a child who had aspects of a spider, as he had like little mandibles on the side of his face. I think maybe little extra eyes. Don't quote me on that. Let me double check, because they do showcase it. Yeah, he has another pair of extra eyes and four spider legs that are growing out of his back, or 8 spider legs growing out of his back. And while for a brief second Mary is repulsed by the child, that second is just that, a second, as she immediately picks up the child and just starts shushing him as she just starts cradling him in her arms. And from there, Mary decided to raise this boy in secret, naming him Peter, I think, or Peter, I don't know, and raising him in the woods. She wound up hiding it from her husband by slaughtering a hen and claiming that it was the child, and to cover up her excursions into the woods, she made the excuse that this was to help her deal with her grief, that she needed to go for long walks. And as a result, Peter lived just outside the village, and for years she cared for him, took care of him, brought him food, made him feel happy, and just as the years went by, Peter grew up happy. His mother gave him unconditional love, and for years she kept telling him that he would go back to the village. It would just take time. It would be when the village was ready for him. As such, Peter, with the help of his mother, kind of did grow up to be a very well-rounded child, albeit with spider abilities, because after all, those extra spider appendages did give him a few advantages, which of course are the standard Spider-Man powers in the multiverse, proportion his strength, speed, and agility, clinging to walls, and even shooting webs out of his wrists. As such, Peter is living happily here, but one particular day when he turns 15, his mother tells him that she can only stay for so long, as she's brought him a bunch of food, and apparently that night in Queen's Redwood, there's going to be a festival, something called the Festival of the Three Moons, because in this world there are 3 moons. Okay? And while Peter would love to go, again, his mother reminds him that the village isn't ready, but she will come back the next day and spend more time with Peter to make up for it. As such, she leaves, and while Peter's a little distraught that she's going, he does understand. Unfortunately, his mother doesn't get the chance to keep her promise, because that night, Queen's Redwood is attacked by a group of hunters called the Cravens. And yes, they are meant to be like Craven the Hunter. They're all even wearing lion pelts. And, well, they're unlike Mother, who came asking for food and shelter, these guys came asking for trouble, as they begin just tearing apart the village and brutalizing and killing whoever they can find, which sadly includes Mary. As such, Peter ends up hearing about all this, and seeing his mother in distress, he decides to intervene. And as a result, we get Sun Spider coming in and just kicking the Craven's ass as he jumps in, starts swinging webs, fighting them all, just basically whooping everyone's ass. And by the end, he does save what's left of the village, though he sadly did not save his mother. And while he did want to go over to her body to try and hold her, well, again, his father had no idea Peter was even a thing, and so when Peter tries approaching his mom, Ricker just runs up and shoves Peter away, telling him, "Leave us alone, you monster," with tears in his eyes. And while Peter does briefly want to tell his father who he really is, that he's his son, that was his mother, she raised him, Peter decides against it, considering the village's own superstitions and just how his father reacted, he thinks that his father would reject him right away. And as such, he decides to keep it a secret as he skulks back to the shadows outside the village. So, that's that story. My thoughts on them both. First, the spinster story. Believe it or not, I think this one's better than the first one. Now, the original spinster story I thought was entertaining enough, though it did have its flaws to it, which, like I said, mostly pertained to all the songs and how it went around. And those flaws are still kind of true for the spinster story in this miniseries. But I will say this. It's actually a lot better this time around. There's not as much singing in this story as there was in the last story. It's still there, but it's just not as prevalent. Like, the first half of the story does have more singing than the second half, which does make the first half a little bit of a slog to get through, but the second half, I think, makes up for it by actually having a still very entertaining story. I like that there are ramifications from Princess Petra's actions in the last Edge of Spider-Verse miniseries, that her mother did end up her shattering that Mysterio orb didn't result in his mother being free from its dark influence. It had a negative feedback on her, and now she's unconscious, and now she's in a mystical coma. And as such, Spinstress has to try and figure out how to save her mother, while also dealing with other oncoming threats in the form of Kraven the Huntsman. Which, yes, this is the third story so far where Kraven is the bad guy. Who'd have thunk it? But at the same time, I like that we get a little bit more with Norma, because when I first read Spinstress' story in the last Edge of Spider-Verse, even I was like, there's gotta be something else to this, because again, it was clear that Norma was the Green Goblin, and there aren't a lot of versions of the Green Goblin in the multiverse who would just be that altruistic, who would help someone out and do something nice for them just for the sake of doing something nice for them. Even if they did have the stipulation of, oh, by the way, get me that orb. But so, pretty much learning that Norma was playing Petra from the start and only granted her wish because that was the stipulation for her being able to enter the castle. It actually makes sense, and I like it. And yeah, you could argue maybe that was a bit predictable of a plot twist, but again, you knew that she had ulterior motives, so I'm just glad they actually got revealed in that regard. And well, again, it's kind of cool. It's still kind of cool seeing Norma. It's still seeing nice. It's nice seeing Spindrift clash with Norma in that regard. Plus again, I do like seeing I still like seeing more of the universe. I like that we see I like that Spinstress is now dealing with this world's version of Kraven the Huntsman plus technically the Vulture, and I love the developments with Princess Petra and Mary James. I like seeing their relationship develop. There's good humor, so I think that's nice. There's definitely some good humor throughout the story as well, as they do kind of make fun of the fact that Princess Petra tends to be blissfully ignorant when she arrives back in her universe, and Mary James tries to tell her, hey, look, you don't want to be here, you're a wanted woman now, but she just keeps singing about how wonderful everything is, and that everything will be fine when she gets home. It's actually kind of hilarious. Plus, again, there was the scene where Kraven insulted Princess Petra and Webster and said that they're nothing to be feared, with Webster shaking his fist at him. I loved the scene. I loved when Mary James asked Kraven why he was doing all this, and he just sings a song about how a huntsman hunts because that's what a huntsman does. And even after it's all over, Mary James is like, thank you, that was very illuminating. Just like you just feel the sarcasm in his voice when he says it, and I love it. And again, even the ending I think is really well, because at the end of the day, while Spinstress is still seen as an assassin in the eyes of the kingdom, I do like that she does still get a little victory. Unfortunately, because she's still an alternate version of Spider-Man, that victory is a little tainted, as while she has her mother back, well, the guy that she's beginning to fall in love with, he's been infected by a dark magic, which has transformed him into this world's version of Venom. Which means that the next time we see Spinstress, she and Mary Janes are probably going to be having their very first couple spat. So, yeah, that's not very interesting. That's going to be bad. Though at the very least, I still like the design for Venom. I love that he does actually look like a literal demon. That he has a ripped version of Mary James's cape across on him, and then he's got a pair of horns. Let me see if I can actually let me see if I can find a good shot of Venom. It's a very good design. So. Here it is. This is Venom. Just look at it. It looks really cool. He's even got wings. It's pretty damn awesome. But yes. But yeah, like I said, again. I think it actually does work to its advantage. Like with the original story, it's clear that you're supposed to not take this too seriously, because again, it's the tale of Spider-Man if Spider-Man was a Disney princess, but it's still very action-packed, and it does lean more into the superhero tropes this time around, with having Princess Petra becoming more of an active force now, since at this point she does have her superpowers, and thus she's now duking it out with her own brand of supervillains, like with Kraven the Huntsman, the Vulture, Norma when she's revealed as the bad guy. Plus, and it's still got some pretty impressive action. The singing is toned back in the second half, which allows us more time for exposition from Norma as she talks about what her whole plan was. Plus, again, it still gives us enough time for some good action and twists and turns. It's again fun stuff, and I enjoy it. It's still silly, and the singing still can be annoying, but at the end of the day, I do find it entertaining and enjoyable in its own regard. So on the whole, the first story with Spinstress, definitely a fun time. As for the Sky Spider story, this one's a kind of a different breed, which is kind of strange, but in a way, I feel like it's very unique in that regard. I like the uniqueness of this world. I like that, like with the Spinster story, it's a fantasy setting. But unlike the Spinster story, which had a bit of whimsy and magic to it, this one feels a lot more dark. Like, this isn't really a magical fantasy kind of deal with epic knights and great heroes. This is just a world where superstition runs rampant, and any magic in this world is wielded by dark forces that mean to do you harm. And while we don't see too much of that, like the most magical thing we see in this story is when Mother infects the well of Queen's Redwood, and as a result, all the expectant mothers in the village give birth to human human animal hybrids. But what I do find interesting is how that's kind of funneled into the story, if that makes any sense. Just like being able to see this world, like let's go to Sky Spider in that regard. Peter. I love how that's his origin story in this world, as it's very unique and very interesting. That the idea that he was born as this Spider-Man hybrid who developed these abilities because who didn't develop these abilities because of an accident, but because of a curse on his mother. And what I like is that, like with most other Spideys, he does still develop a strong moral fiber, mostly because his mother was still there for him. She wasn't it like initially she was freaked out by her son, but that immediately gave way to love as she realized this is a poor baby that needs help. And so she raised him ever since, and basically any hate that she would have had for him as this monstrous hybrid faded just as quickly as it arrived, because she loved her son and she raised him to be a good kid. Even with all the extra spider powers and appendages, she still saw him as just a regular 15-year-old boy. And and I like that was and I ultimately, like with most other versions of the webhead, that relationship ended in tragedy as one night he failed to save her. It's, again, kind of dark, and it's kind of dark, made even more tragic by the fact that he still exists in this world that is outwardly and blatantly afraid of him just for being what he is, by having these appendages on his back, having the extra eyes, being able to shoot webs out of his wrist. They see him as a freak and a monster, and Queen's Redwood still wants nothing to do with that sort of thing. Hell, the attack by the Cravens might even encourage that mindset. They probably don't even give a shit that Sky Spider came in and saved them. They just don't want anything to do with him. And as a result, the story itself is pretty the origin story for Sky Spider can be pretty standard once you get to the whole tragedy aspect with the death of his mother. I feel like what led to him what led to him existing in the first place, plus the general details of the world, do still make it very interesting. And I won't lie, I would be interested in seeing more of how this world works, how it develops, how does society work in this world? Are there other villages out there? Do they have their own little problems? Would they also become? How would Peter's life be how would Peter's life be without his mother? Would he start growing hatred, or would he start wanting to reach out to other people and try and be a good person? Is he going to stay in Queen's Redwood? I want to know more about that sort of thing. I would love to know more about the world as a result, as there's enough fantastical elements that keep you drawn in, but still enough mundane elements to give a base of reality. Again, there's still something clearly mystical about this world. Like I said, they have 3 moons and old lady turned children into spider-human hybrids. But at the very least, I feel like with how little they reveal, it still makes the story interesting, because I would like to know more about where the story is headed. I would like to see more of what led to everything being the way it was. I would love to see how this world operates, and I feel like that if this world got revisited again and we saw more of Sky Spider, I'd be happy to see it. So, on the whole, an interesting and kind of unique take on the tale of Spider-Man in a somewhat fantastical setting with a bit of a grimdark setup. So, on the whole, interesting story. So, yeah. Overall, Spencer's story, enjoyable fun, and definitely pulls back on some of the blatantly kind of intrusive aspects of the original story, while leaning more into the whole superhero aspects. I think make it a more fun time and enjoyable. And likewise, the Sky Spider story, like I said, unique setting with a bit of grimdark stuff there and there that do make me want to see more of this world and see exactly how it ticks, so to speak. So, yeah, that's really all I have to say. It's still a good issue. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you next Tuesday as we look at issue 3, and we learn a bit more about the main universe Spider-Boy. So till then, I hope you have a good Saturday, and take care.